Welcome in Alte Schmiede. Those who don't know me so far, I am the man with the little red hammer and with the red stars, Walter Fammler. I'm also a founding member of Eurozine, a long-term participant of the magazine meetings, and also the general secretary of Alte Schmiede Art Society. A few words about this house here. You are here in one of the eldest parts of Vienna. The house was built in the 16th century. You see you are in a downstairs area. There's even one more downstairs cellar like this beneath us. The house, to keep it short, was hosting a blacksmith from 1880 on. The blacksmith was working in this house until 1972. The house was heavily bombed in 1944. So what you, it was only half of the house, this part was existing, but in the backyard, never they built up a house after 45. So the blacksmith had the opportunity to enlarge his working place. And then in 1972, gentrification, city somehow forced him to move to the edge of the city, like many of this little industry. And also I have to mention that this was not, he was a very important blacksmith, because after 45, there was a lot of damage in the castles. So when you see these big doors on the castles, it's all blacksmith's work. They did the replicas in this blacksmith shop upstairs. The house then was sold because the blacksmith could buy the ruin in 45 and developed it for his purpose. And then the house was sold to a city-owned publishing house, which was a very important publishing house for the Red Vienna, Jugend und Volk Verlag, Youth and People Publishing House, which was a very important publishing house in the Red Vienna. I don't talk about this, the history of the Red Vienna, it's vanishing now. And then the house was sold again to a city-owned insurance company, which is also very active in some of the former communist countries like Hungary, Romania, ex-Yugoslavia and so on, Wiener Städtische Versicherung. In 1974, Art Society Alte Schmiede was founded, and since then we developed a program basically rooted in the field of contemporary literature. So in this house we host up to 180 literary events every year. It means book presentations, workshops, and. And it's very internationally oriented, but it's also, of course, focused on Austrian and German literature. We also host a musical program. That means we have like 60 concerts every year. Basically, it's also on a workshop base in the field of modern avant-garde music and electronic music. And we also have programs which are extra programs, like 3 days events. We'll have one soon. It's called, you can see the leaflet outside, those who can read German. It's called Different Worlds, Anders Welten, and it's on utopia and dystopia. Last year, and I talked about this in Tallinn, we had a 3 days event on dialectics of liberations, and next year we'll have curated by among them a few, among the curators, a few authors like Ilya Troyanov, a huge program which is called the Utopian Space. So I think this is enough information for the beginning. Welcome again to Alte Schmiede, and I pass over to my colleague Reka. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walter, and also let me thank again in the name of Eurozine, the Alte Schmiede and Walter Fammler for having us and hosting us here today and tomorrow at this, to my impression, very impressive place, let's to say the least. And one technical announcement. There's going to be loads of these, but since there is no cable internet connection, we will have to, and we're in a cellar right now, you will have to be able to put up without a live internet connection. I don't know if you folks are able to do that, but I would assume you are. But that's just the technicalities. But don't forget to stream everything if you have the internet connection upstairs. Anyways, just to turn to the actual point, very welcome, good morning. I hope everyone had a great night's rest, or at least it was worth it not sleeping enough. This panel is titled Populism and the Representation Gap for very obvious reasons. We are going to debate, or maybe just elaborate on rather, whether socioeconomic justice and cultural identity are naturally as opposed to each other as they often said to be, or as they are depicted to be. And here are my guests for tonight. It's not the kind of impression I'm supposed to use here, but still, this is, let me start with Dominika Kasprovic. She is the director of Villadicius Association and also a sociologist at the Institute for Journalism, Media and Social Communication at the Jagiellonian University. Cornelia Kopec, a professor of sociology from the Technical University of Darmstadt.
Yeah.
One thing achieved now. Mario Ricciardi, the director of Rivista Il Mulino, a Bolognan philosopher at the other end of the table. And here just beside me, Marc-Olivier Padis, the director of Terra Nova think tank and a former editor of Esprit. And without further ado, let me give the word right away to Dominika, who is going to open up the discussion with a presentation. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And may I ask for this few slides I prepared for you. I would like to start with a few words of thanksgiving, first of all, for being invited, and second, for taking up the efforts to organize these meetings, which I find a very important endeavor these days, especially. So I'm coming from Poland, and I do represent two fields. This is an NGO sector. Particularly, this is a Villadicius Association, one of the oldest and the biggest Polish NGOs based in Krakow. But I'm also an academic trained in sociology and political science with the Department of Journalism, Media and Social Communication. And what I decided to do, if I may ask for the first slide. The first slide. I wanted to start with a notion that obviously it's too late to again pick up the topic and struggle with the definition of populism, because the populism and populist politics are already here, and so it's already succeeded. What I will elaborate on in short are the very detailed results of an experiment that has been done within a large scientific consortium within the last 2 years. And the second one, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the cost action that was dedicated to the particular aspect of populism, that is its communication aspects, communication characteristics. I will tell you a bit in short about the empirical evidence from this effects on exposure to the populist message, on citizens' political attitudes and vote intentions. This experiment has been conducted in 15 European countries on the quite large sample of over 15,000 respondents. What we simply did, we created a fake news. May I have the third one? The fake news, the last one, please. The fake news that looked like this. Here you have the Polish version of it. It was a message looking more or less like a Euronews web page that was saying, the Polish version is here, that the new economic crisis is coming, is just around the corner, and there were several groups to be blamed for this. And let's get back to the third slide, and we'll stop for a minute here, because as you probably know, this populism, as we understand it, is a combination of two things. So there is this component of the failed representation of the ordinary people, and it's usually combined with this antagonism, moral antagonism between the good people and the evil elites or dangerous others. If you combine these two, and here you have the small graph that shows you the 6 possible combinations of these 3 elements. So the one targeting the elites, the one targeting the outgroup, the one that is only focusing of the sovereign and its advantages. But generally speaking, we try to check whether a short time exposure, just 20 seconds, of this fake news would have any kind of impact on the actual topic of this panel, so on attitudes or on even voting intentions of our respondents. So, and to be brief and to get to the last slide, some conclusions and remarks, actually it had. So imagine a sample, random sample of 15,000 European respondents seeing for 20 seconds a fake and not very reliable news, saying that the new crisis is coming because of listed number of enemies. And then what we saw were not a huge effect, but we saw something. We saw definitively that in general terms, that not a single message, but a combination of others, a combination of these elements has an impact, has a significant, statistically significant impact of the wide European audience. What we also saw, which was pretty clear, was that what leads to this pro-populist attitudes, the voting intention, increase of voting intention towards populist parties, was also dependent on overall political climate that makes a difference for the success of populist coups. 20 seconds matter. It also means I took only a few of these results to show you here this morning, and I decided that it would be maybe a good starting point for the discussion between the people that are engaged in the media sector, in a sense that if this fake 20-second exposure could have a significant impact of an attitude that combines of knowledge, emotions, and this readiness to take up actions, it could be, I mean, this phenomena, this format, this knowledge could also be taken as a starting point for counter-actions towards or anti-populist actions towards the wider European audience. I think it was 4 minutes or even a bit more, so thank you for now.
Also, thank you for respecting the format. And so what we're going to do is, thank you. What we're going to do is we go a quick round of introductory addresses of the topic, and then we're going to open up the floor relatively early for your comments and questions. And I'm emphasizing comments as well, so it's not just, you know, we're holding the wisdom and you are entitled to get a little piece of it should you ask the right questions. It's not like that. But to go on with this round with introductions, let me ask Cornelia to elaborate a little bit on the class issue, because in the first and most superficial format of this argument, it's a very sort of vulgar narodnik approach to the people being forgotten about and thus reacting foolishly.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I'm a sociologist, and I will represent the AfD, the German case. But let me first highlight some general issues. In my opinion, we have a fundamental change of the political scene, because what it means to be right-wing or left-wing has fundamentally changed. In the former industrial society, left and right means to be a kind of economic position. In Germany, for example, left means social democratic, and right has meant a more liberal policy about economics. And now we have a new meta-polarity between liberal policies on the one side, and that means cultural liberalism as well as economic liberalism. And these two sorts of liberalism have been converged. They are converging because we have a kind of overlapping of cultural and economic liberalism. And on the other side, the opposite side, we have a new desire for closure. And this kind of closure has several aspects. For example, national closure, but also exclusive solidarity and communitarism. And this brings me now to the class aspects of the new class struggle we observe here, because the left, and this is what is highlighted here in the presentation of the moderation of the discussion panel, they tend to overemphasize economic question and economic injustice and economic inequality. And in my opinion, the rise of a right-wing populism is an indication of a new kind of class struggle that mixes two sorts of conflicts. On the one hand, cultural, symbolic struggles, as Pierre Bourdieu has pronounced that, symbolic struggles about who is in the majority to define the rules. The definition hegemonic, the kind of who says what is the rule about, what is the game about. It's not about identity. Often it is mixed up with identity politics, and in my opinion this is short-sighted, because it's not about identity, it's about who defines the rules in this society. This is one point, and here has a new collision between different class fractions, formed or forged, a new coalition between certain upper classes falling behind middle classes and precarious underclasses. Because, as the case of Germany and United States says, the voters with a background, with a working class background, are a minority of the voters. So we have at least 3/3 of the electorate who is at least middle class. And we have to explain how this could be. And this is not the social question in the foreground, but this is about norms, values, rules, and the kind of question who at all is we. Who should be defined the total social system? Who is society? Where are the borders? This question is more fundamental than the question, how should we distribute or redistribute our wealth? The question is, who at all is society? So I guess I have filled my 4 minutes.
Yes, precisely. I have to applaud you for that. So let me ask Mario for now to tell us a little bit more about the Italian example, if you will.
Yes, the Italian example is a bit different as far as populism is concerned, because we had in Italy the phenomenon of Silvio Berlusconi, who was very much a forerunner of populist-style politics before actually the economic crisis struck the European middle classes. I mean, what we are seeing now with this new government in Italy is largely the effect, I would say, of the crisis. Not because there's a phenomenon of actual falling behind at the moment. I mean, the poverty is increasing in Italy, but it's not that the real issue. But what is really changing is that the economic crisis has changed the perception of the future in the middle classes in Italy. Many people feel their social position as being endangered by the new economic situation, and they are afraid, and they go for parties who somehow promise some sort of protection, and that is the Five-Star Movement and the League on the other side. But to put what is happening in perspective, you should talk about Berlusconi, because it was Berlusconi who created the conditions for the rise of the Northern League. Salvini has transformed the Northern League from a local movement with very peculiar issues, mostly connected to the situation of the northern regions of Italy, to what is claiming now to be a nationwide movement with some consensus even in the south, which was traditionally vilified by the Northern League, and in the center, mostly in the former red regions like Tuscany and Emilia and so on and so forth. This is I mean, it's not still a situation of hegemony in these areas, but is increasing the consent for the Northern League. And this was very much building upon what Berlusconi did in more than 20 years, which was essentially transforming the political cultural landscape, giving back some sort of legitimacy to neo-fascist attitudes. I mean, he was not a neo-fascist, but he kept inside his majority his broad alliance, people who came from neo-fascism, and so giving back legitimacy to attitudes which very often were just on the verge of being explicitly racist and discriminating against, for example, homosexuals, having a very traditional understanding of the family and so on and so forth. So Salvini comes very much from that. The Five-Star Movement is more strong in the center and southern part of Italy, and is very much about middle classes feeling themselves threatened by the economic situation and feeling betrayed by the left, because the other factor which is very important in Italy is that the Democratic Party has switched very much towards the center ideologically, and has, I would say, fairly constantly advocated policies that are most aptly described as more slightly right-wing than left-wing. And this was very much a kind of breaking point with respect to the traditional consensus of the party. It's very interesting, the topic with respect to education and research in general, all the university policy with respect to which the Democratic Party has been seen by people who work in the academy as very much the enemy in the recent years, because they were at the forefront of many reforms that were perceived as being amounting to a stealth privatization of the university system. I'm not saying that this is a correct representation, but this was the perception. So maybe I will stop here.
Just let me remind that I remember 2 days ago we published on Eurozine Philip Mano's piece by the title "Let's Dissolve the People Then," who actually closes his argument by saying there should be a sustained differentiation between local models. That's why, in part, why we're talking about these local occurrences and not as very homogenic phenomena of populism all over Europe or over the North Atlantic. And also, he warns to differentiate between the losers and the people who have something to lose, which I assume
Actually,
has a connection
if I
to.
may add a point,
Sure.
this is very interesting because especially during Renzi's tenure as secretary of the Democratic Party, he constantly associated all his political message with this winners towards versus losers rhetoric, and constantly put the Democratic Party on the side of the winners. I mean, with this image of being very much the party of those who strive for emerging, which in a situation in which many people felt threatened, didn't fell out very well with the electorate.
Thank you. Marc-Olivier, let me ask you about your point on this. I assume you see it as a sort of innovation. I assume this because I was shameless enough to read into your note.
Yes, I think maybe what's interesting in the French situation is that we have a case of political renewal of the political scene, which is not coming from the extreme right or left, but coming from the center. I much agree with what Cornelia said about the description of the political scene. For years now, political scientists say that people don't agree with a simple representation between left and right, and there is these new representations if you agree with an open society or if you wish a closed society, and then if you're more liberal or if you ask more authority in political life. And so that's the new description of the political scene, but the old party system doesn't match with this new frame of values because they still stick to the distinction between left and right. So political scientists were saying for years in France, people don't like to say if they don't find it relevant to say left and right, but it's more relevant to say open, close, liberal authority. And then what happened is that the last presidential elections changed completely the game because Emmanuel Macron understood that it was the moment to change the whole political scene. And the surprise of this election was not that he was able to defeat Marine Le Pen, because that was in a way predictable that many people wouldn't ever vote for the far right in France. But the surprise was that he was able to gain then the legislative election with new candidates coming from nowhere that nobody heard about. My personal guess was that he would be elected, but with no majority. But in fact, he had a majority with a complete renewal of the political scene with new people. So what does that mean? Nobody knows, in fact. Who are the people who decided to vote for this new political movement? So we made a study with political scientists on the members of La République En Marche, so the new party. We sent by email, because the party has all the emails of the members. So we sent questions, and we had over 8,000 answers, so we could really do something interesting with it. And to say very briefly the result of this study is that it shows that you have at the same time people coming from the left, people coming from the right, people who doesn't recognize left or right, and at the same time very pragmatic people saying that we should only take the best from left and right, and also people who feel more left behind, who are very angry, who wanted to change the political system, who joined this anti-elitism, and who were happy to have this opportunity to change completely the game. Now, if we, the question is this distinction between left and right relevant anymore? So we had the question, if you have a scale getting from 1 on the left to 10 on the right, where are you on this scale? And the majority of the members say it's around 5. And Emmanuel Macron, where is he on this scale? They say he's 5.2, 5.3, so a little bit on the right. But where are the other parties? The Conservative Party is at 8 to 10. And that means that the far right, really Marine Le Pen, is at 10. So their feeling is that the Conservative Party drifted far, far away on the right, and they cannot recognize themselves in this drift to the far right. And the Socialist Party is at 2, so very, very far on the left. So what you see is that between 2 and 8, you have a huge space where there's nobody except La République En Marche and Emmanuel Macron. So he has an enormous space, at least at the moment. We'll see how it goes. But I think that's what's interesting is that he really was able, with this party, to change something. That means that the voters were waiting for a new political offer. And if you look at the European scene, political scene in the last 15 or 20 years, all the new political offers are coming from the far right, in fact. Because the Green was a new political offer, but that was in the 70s, they were new. But now they're not new anymore. They are in the middle of the game in many ways. So I just wanted to say what's interesting in the French case is to see that voters were waiting for a new political offer, and if the new political offer comes in the center, well, you can have a more interesting transformation.
Well, it's a very optimistic view, although many used to say back at the times of the election that Macron is in large part a product of Brexit, Trump, and the Le Pens, or the fight over them, because, or at least in comparison, I'm not stating it's true or so, I'm just stating that this was a common criticism against Macron. Also, it was a widespread criticism against Hollande, that he was so middle ground in many senses, or perceived as very middle ground. It would be lovely to get back on that, but I happen to be aware that Dominica has a lot of criticism about this theory of being simply left out of representation. Could you please elaborate on this? And we're going to go around of everyone amending their own statements and reacting to each other.
I haven't had a chance to give you some insight into the Polish situation or the Polish political developments. Probably most of you are somehow in touch what has been happening in Poland, and actually what has been happening is the radical change of a political system and constitutional order, and also the societal framework. And this example of a Law and Justice Party winning also on the local level, tomorrow we are having the second final round of the local elections in Poland. It's an evidence for the fact that there is nothing like a representation gap in at least a few important for many reasons countries, because for the Law and Justice Party voted young and old, well educated and underskilled, the underdogs of transformations and its winners. I mean, the support for this radical new offer, political offer, has been throughout the cohorts, the electorates, and the classes. And it's not only the Polish example, although it could serve also to explain a bit more about the left or right cleavage. I just maybe want to elaborate shortly a bit more about that. Populism, in my view, obviously is not a left or right phenomena. It's an immanent element of the representative democracy. It's always been there. It's a phenomena that is a result of this constant struggle between the sovereign and its representations. And when it does not work well, we have this outbursts of populism. It can be a populist party, it can be a populist charismatic leader, it can be a populist radical reform or change that occurs on different levels. But obviously the fact that populism is there it brings us back to the questions about what went wrong, and the answer about not having the new offer for the new type of society, both West and East Europe, I mean, it's one of the possible answers. Another one is obviously this generation gap and the communication channels that has been used. From many research we've been doing in the last 10 years on populism, I pick up this example of the recent online experiment to show you the importance of the new communication channel and this prevalent effect the online communication has, although Cambridge Analytica proved it a bit earlier and maybe more effectively. I will be happy to answer your question regarding the peculiarities of the Polish politics these days, and maybe I'll give the floor to other panelists now.
Please, thank you. Also, let me draw back the question to Cornelia, as you finished on the point saying the matter is how we define us or how we define society, and this is also kind of a peculiar contradiction between right-wing populists very heavily criticizing leftist and liberal identity politics, actually demonizing rather, and then seeming to be sinking in identity politics of their own. So how does this work? Is this the actual question that we should be focusing on but we're missing, or is this a side issue?
Yes, in my opinion, the solution cannot be to play against each other, the identity politics and the class politics, because class politics always has been identity politics, because in the former industrial society, class politics was about males. And it was about a very conservative family picture, and the classes that was represented was the Facharbeiter, that means working class males. So you can say that the former class politics always has been identity politics, and the what is called identity politics, and the left now is accused by right-wing populism only to represent identity politics. But if you say, for example, feminism has always about the pie. It is always a kind of plea of political and social participation that is universalistic and about the fair pay of jobs. So it is as well class politics. But what I think is the point is that something has changed due to globalization processes, so that the borders of political and cultural identity won't fit together anymore. What I mean is that we have a rise of new post-national identities, especially in the upper middle classes, the so-called cosmopolites. And these cosmopolites have a new kind of decentration of a symbolic order and identity that is not at all national anymore. So there is a kind of diffusion, and this is the point in Germany why the right-wing populates agitates against genderism and anti-genderism and gender toilets and so on. That's a kind of amusing game in the public sphere. But in my opinion, this deals with basic classification patterns. So who is allowed to tell us what are about social classification at all? How many genders should be admissioned?
Sorry, also how you are supposed to react when you are already excluded from the nation and you're not supposed to be cosmopolitan though, right? Based on gender oppression or anything of the sort.
Yes, of course, because gender is a paradigm. That's a paradigm of the kind of how closed classification should be, how strong, how separated the classification is. And if there is a distinct binary logic about gender, or if it is allowed to overlap and to be mobile between the two classification groups. And also you can apply it to migrants and to kind of ethnic identities. Should there be a strong separation between different countries, different ethnic communities, different peoples, or is it allowed to be overlapping? And the overlapping is a kind of a Querschnittkategorie. It cuts across different forms of identity, gender, ethnic, and classes. So the question is if there is allowed a mixture, or do you have advocate for a strong separation of categories?
And also what you do once your categories overlap anyways and you are excluded. So you're not understood socially, you're not talked of socially.
Genau.
This is not only the matter of representation, but also like political representation included, right?
Right.
Thanks. Mario, we heard that Italians were populists before it was cool.
Yeah.
We know you're the greatest hipsters in many regards.
Yeah, we are always ahead of things as far as political degeneration is concerned since the beginning of the 20th century, as you know.
We've always been great at conservatism.
Yeah, we are always ahead of things. Yes, I'd like to elaborate shortly on 2 points, if I may. First of all, I have a slightly different perspective on the left versus right divide, maybe because of my background. I'm a philosopher, a political philosopher. And I would say that the distinction between left and right is very much a matter of articulating coherent principles. This doesn't mean necessarily that people do perceive themselves as being left-wing or right-wing according to a coherent vision of what being left and right means. I mean, for example, in Italy, you very clearly see two different understanding of the left at the moment. One is the understanding that sees the left as cosmopolitan, very much connected with rights issues and question of identity to a certain extent. And of course, this is very much criticized by a kind of more conservative opinion, which in Italy tends to be rather strong because of the influence of Catholic culture. I wouldn't bet very much on the fact that many Italians are actual Christians, but I mean the weight of culture, Catholic culture, is still very strong. On the other hand, you have an understanding of left and right, which is very much centered on the distributional issues and on issues concerned with fairness. This was regarded as being rather old-fashioned in recent years, and this was also the understanding that the Democratic Party leadership head of the problem, but it's coming back very much as a consequence of the crisis. The problem is, can you keep together the civil rights issue and let's say distributional fairness topic into a coherent vision? I would say yes. I mean, it's what normally socialist liberal political tradition, as far as political philosophy was concerned, did. I mean, Rawlsian liberalism was very much about keeping together the two sides. I mean, basic liberties and a certain amount of fairness. The problem is how you sell this kind of political ideology to an electorate which is very much confused, afraid. And here, a very short point on the representational topic. The big problem, I think, the representational gap has been perceived in Italy, but I would say more generally in the Western world and in Europe in particular, with respect to the increasing importance of non-representative institutions in the governmental machinery. As far as Europe is concerned, institutions like the European Central Bank and to a certain extent other European institutions whom many people perceive as not being quite accountable to the electorate for their decisions. I think that is a major problem for the perception of this gap, because people feel that many issues, think for example about fiscal policy and distributional policies, are not anymore in control of the national electorates. And that is something that increases this sense of not being properly represented in their aspirations. I agree very much with what Ian Zelonka says in this recent book, Counter-Revolution. I mean, the problem with liberalism in Europe is basically that many people felt betrayed by liberals, because liberals went all along with the neoliberal program as far as the governance of Europe was concerned. And I, as a liberal, would say that the problem is that I mean, for liberals, it's trying to put forward a coherent version of a liberal policy, which is not neoliberal anymore. And that might be a big contribution to the renewal of the left-wing culture in Europe.
I remember how baffled I was when one of my professors back at the university told me in class when we were debating a particular issue that being coherent is a very leftist requirement.
Yes.
It felt like a slap in my face as he identified as conservative, so he just refused this request of ours. But it sort of explained a couple of things, especially why we couldn't win a debate anyways. But that's beside the point. So let's get back to the point of how much a renewal is going down.
Yes, I will just have one remark about this topic of representation gap. And it takes me back to this renewal in the French situation. Sure. Is that we had so this representation gap is really a democratic issue. And in the last election, when people were asked, what do you expect from this election? What should we change in the country? There was a very interesting answer, which was, in fact, the country changed very much in the last 20 years. And the representation gap was not functioning as the political elite thought. The political discourse is to say we have to change the society. And when you give voice to the people, they say, in fact, the society changed already. It incredibly changed. The school changed, civil servants changed, the local politics changed, everything changed. The only thing that didn't change is the political elite. The blockage comes from the political elite and not from the country. And that was what happened, is that the people voted to change the political elite, and that's what happened. So what's funny, it's completely reversed the traditional version of the representation gap.
Well, it's oftentimes an experience of many that in some sense the decision maker's side or the production side in whichever environment is way more conservative than the audiences are, be they political, public, or audiences that we are working for. At least in my experience, it's been very devastating to see that those who are being criticized as giving up on old-timey professional values are actually way less daring than they see themselves as. And they are playing for a middle ground that oftentimes doesn't even exist. And not only society is changing, not only education is changing or should be changing in terms of policies, but also the means of production have very much changed. So we're seeing a public or republics of people that have pretty much nothing to do with the legislative frameworks that they are living in, and just trying to make do with what they have. So we have all touched up on, or you have all touched up on, is how this hypothesis of people voting for populists because they are feeling left behind on a class matter, like feeling left behind by the left, is does have substance, but it's not as one-dimensional as this one class understanding would indicate, which kind of seems obvious if you think about just 200 years back, people were complaining why people don't vote or don't support political movements according to their class interests. So it's not a very, very new occurrence. So how, and let's go another round, and then please prepare with your questions and comments. Let's go another round. If you can give me positive examples of how these things are being tackled in your own political environment. If we could just, or let's say, Dominica, if you see that 20 seconds of exposure to a piece of fake news can have such an impact, what sort of real news can have such an impact in 20 seconds? How are we supposed to formulate our headlines? Now, I know that it's a very superficial question and it's more of a joke, but still, do you see a trend that can actually turn this thing around?
Not yet a trend, but I thought that this example of one of many academic research could be a pretty interesting lesson for all of us who are actively involved in reshaping the societies or reversing the trends, in the sense that if we focus not on a content but on a format, it's obvious that keep repeating the counter story can have the same effect as it has when loaded with this anti-immigrant, anti-elitistic message.
That's very pedagogical, right? Petitio est mater studiorum, write it down 100 times and then...
I mean, I chose it also because the online message as a main political tool has not been fully recognized yet. It's been used mostly for this manipulation type of activism, but not as an important and mainstream, at least for the Central and Eastern Europe. It seems not so yet there. Just to refer to the representation gap of those who felt not winners of the transformation, or not winners of the 21st century economy. In the Polish case, it's also a peculiar situation because actually I realized that there is this representation gap in a sense that there is none of the left. I mean, we can choose out of right, center right, or far right. So there is a lot of space to be filled in. When it comes to some like positive remarks and some hints, as I said, populism obviously could turn into leftists or rightists, and we observe it. But as I mentioned, it's an immanent element of the system where the people who want to be listened and those who are supposed to represent are in constant struggle. And the stress on whether the struggle is based on a positive, constructive values or on the opposite is of the very big importance these days. So that would be our role as a civil society and media people to actually turn attention to this aspect. So the processes behind, not only on the content of the message.
Well, many also theorists, some of them I would call charismatic, arrogant theorists, would argue or do argue that populism in quite a sense can be used as a reverse tool to promote positive things. You don't have to share this value or this understanding of populism, but the methodology does suggest that this is applicable for different reasons.
The only thing is that populism differs from other communication styles that is being fueled with negative emotions. So, and it's always a risk to actually play on that string.
Sure. Cornelia, would you mind to remind us of something to wake up for tomorrow?
I wish I could, but I want to talk about because we talked about representation gap in the political field, but we also have to consider the representation gap in the civil society. And in my opinion, and that's a German case, there has a widening gap in the middle classes. And the upper middle classes, which is academic mostly, and which tends to be left, is not only culturally divided from the lower middle classes, but also has fallen in a kind of closure. And this kind of closure is driven by the educational system, which is very selective, and mobility paths that had been established in the 70s, in the 80s, has closed. So we have to open these paths again. That's the first thing we have to do. And the second thing is there's also a spatial closure, a widening gap between the regions, the urban regions, the metropolitan regions, which are prosperous, and on the other side, the left behind regions on the rural areas. And this gap has widened since the beginning of the century. And also there is a gap between the inner attractive centers of the city, like here in Vienna, which is upgraded in a fast pace, and which is tremendous because it's so beautiful to be in the inner cities. But all other people are excluded now because immobilities, the prices of the houses has heightened, and so we have to drive back this kind of closure. And this closure is always about who plays the rules and who is excluded. This is not only a political question, but who is allowed to go to. So is the path to the lights, is it open or is it closed? And we have to do something in order to open the paths again.
And also, I think it's an important issue, closure towards whom or what, because there's a huge difference between closure towards societal groups and closure towards financial capital, in a certain sense.
Yes, but normally the left thought it is always about money elites. The 1% Wall Street, occupy Wall Street, the 1% interest. Of course this is a problem, but we have to also vision our own part in the story. We are not only observers, we are sitting here and we are discussing the topics on this is far away, this is the money elites, the political sphere, Angela Merkel, and so on, Trump. But we are also involved in the picture. We are the representative of the privileged academic urban upper class. And so we have also a part in this game, and we have to reflect if we could change something about the widening gap between the academic class, it's a kind of caste, which has homogenized, and we have also a conversion between economic elites, managers, for example, and cultural professional. The habitus has converged. And in the industrial society, there has been a big gap between the economic and the cultural elites, and this isn't any longer there. So there is a convergence about cultural and economic logics of reproduction. And the manager and the professor and the artist, they are similar now.
I'm sorry, I have to stop you there, even though I know that my rural peasant grandmother is going to cry when she hears I was called an urban elite. It feels amazing.
But it's true.
No, but jokes aside, Mario, tell me something positive about the trends, or suggests some approach which helps us step a bit further from just analysis. Which is respectable. I also prepare really questions and comments.
I mean, the fact that I'm working as editor of a journal who deals with politics and culture means that somehow I think it's worth fighting for changing things, but I don't see a lot of elements to be really
cheerful
optimistic
about?
at the
Okay.
moment. One thing that I would underline very much, and this is it's very much an outcome of my experience in this editorial job, is that I think we should go back really to the idea of the old idea of ideology to explain some of what is going on. For example, as far as Italy is concerned, and as far as the possibility of a renewal of the culture of the left, it is very important the fact that at the moment in Italy there is a kind of cultural block, especially as far as the economic profession is concerned, in being mostly, I mean, the most prominent people and those who are very influential on the public debate are mostly of a neoliberal orientation, even those who were close to the Democratic Party recently. And so it's very difficult for left-wing politics, which is, I mean, there is some movement at the moment in Italy because the left is very much in disarray, but they don't quite find people who can help them to articulate their point of view, because most of the academic profession is very much on the other side from this point of view. I can give you a few examples. I mean, recently
But I will ask you not to, because I was a populist promising we would open up the floor for discussion, and then I didn't deliver on this promise.
Maybe in the discussion.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But let me ask then Marc-Olivier, who seemed way more hopeful, or at least seeing some light at the end of some tunnels.
Well, no, I don't know. You should have invited somebody from Portugal, because maybe in Portugal the situation looks a little better.
But they were busy being so happy about their own political system.
No, I think our job is to open new debates and product new analysis, and to bring new things in the public discourse. In a way, the cultural backlash that we witness today is the product of an ideological work of people who decided to promote their own ideas, and so we are also able to have our own agenda and to change the cultural mood. So we just have to work on that.
In many senses, it feels very, in a classical sense of the word, avant-garde, working for a more distant future, right? Or preparing something for a more distant future, which should be acceptable for people like us. Please raise your hands should you have. Oh, amazing. So, do we draw straws? Or do we go, can we start from the back for now? Yes, yes. Just a sec, we need the mic so the live stream here, this is so you are streamed because there's live streaming going on.
Okay, Sally Davison from Soundings in UK. I just wanted to say I don't think you've given enough credence in your discussion. I think Eastern Europe is a different case, but in Western Europe, Social Democrats have vacated a huge space and left this kind of gap of representation of ordinary people and working class people. And so it's not surprising that new parties have joined in. But if you look at, there are places where the left have actually tried to incorporate a challenge from the left instead of moving to the centre. And obviously we have got left governments in Greece, Portugal and Spain, so it's not a totally gloomy picture. But I just wanted to say something about the Labour Party in Britain, because the kind of common sense in Britain was that, you know, Blair was successful because he shifted the Labour Party to the centre. And everyone just said, oh yes, that must be true. When Corbyn came along, oh no, there's no chance, he will lose, definitely. And of course he did lose, but he lost much more successfully than the previous Blairite continuation leadership had lost. So if you wanted to look for something that's hopeful, I think if old social democratic parties tried to renew themselves and looked at some of the examples of left populism, because there is left populism as well as right populism, then I think there is a lot of hope. And, you know, speaking from someone quite a depressing country, you know, the Labour Party to me is very hopeful because it shows that you can renew an old social democratic party.
Yes.
Sure, it's a brave bet. Can we maybe just go from the back to the front, which is not pretty much the usual thing to do. So we're just open the floor for
Bojan
Nina.
Nepolski from Critique and Humanism in Sofia, Bulgaria. So thank you very much to all speakers. I think the question of representation and also of social inequality are very important to understand the populist phenomena. But I want also to point something which was already pointed out by Cornelia. We just finished a huge research in Sofia about the anti-democratic propaganda in Bulgaria. And it is published in our issue of the last issue of Critique and Humanism. And so the result of this research is that actually the question is, what is to be society today? So this is the crucial question raised by populists. And it is interesting we also try to see what are the accusations of the populists against the liberals. What are the words, the key words? And two of these keywords are Sorosoid, that means follower or somebody paid by George Soros. That means liberal, neoliberal, cosmopolitan. Sorosoid means the negation of the nation, of nationality. But there is also something which is very interesting, that is the word gender. Cornelia also mentioned the word. What does it mean, gender, actually? Not the academic definition of gender, but the real usage of the gender. Gender means not heterosexual. Gender means homosexual, bisexual, transsexual. Gender means migrant. So there is a huge range of groups which are synonymous of gender. So that means that the populist movements, they use such kind of words. That means that we are deeply, deeply threatened in our basic identity. So, and we have to to meet these accusations, I think. And we cannot do it just in the words of political projects. It is much deeper, I think. Thank you.
It is also cheerful to see that this fear of negation of the nation pretty much unifies all nations, populists, from Israel to Brazil. Because, you know, being afraid of the words Soros and gender is quite a direct import through political spheres. Thank you.
So I grabbed the microphone, so I don't know if I pass somebody here in the room. No. I'm Thorsten Schilling from the Federal Center for Civic Education from Berlin and Bonn in Germany. So at least in Germany, we are now approaching the scenery of rising right-wing populism, also on the federal level. And for me, it was very interesting to listen to you, and step by step, you filled the gaps I saw. But I would say that my feeling is that we see the deconstruction of the ideology of the last centuries which is the inequality as fate. So it was bought in by social democrats, by the right people, right-wing conservative parties. And if you look at the left center, then at least in Germany, you can really describe it also in numbers, that the deconstruction of public infrastructure, be it the communal representation structures, the vanishing of state from the countryside, and if you see the public infrastructure in Germany, one of the richest countries and the winner of the austerity politics in Europe, you see that there's a $1 billion euro gap of investment in public infrastructure in the educational field. You can see that the selling of public goods in be it water delivery or be it flats, the incoming of the social questions, the social question is already there. So my feeling is that this belief in inequality is a fate we can't dissolve, is a big question. And then the right-wing populists, they, at least for some parts of the population, they are promising a new kind of equality. Also, that for me, the difference between communitarism and cosmopolitanism is wrong. We need a more, I would say, a new left fantasy about equality. So, thank you.
New left fantasy sounds enticing.
Thank you, but I would follow on you. Actually, I had similar remarks. Ever since we were told that the history ended, we were told also that there is no alternative. And I think that we have been seeing populism rising ever since 1990. It's not a new thing. And I would argue that the core business of politics since 1990 has become business and economy. So never probably never since the Second World War in the European history has it been so obvious that the political elites are economic elites solely. So there is no political vision. I'm very cynical, and I'm talking from the European semi-periphery, which is Croatia. But I see that it's crawling up to the European center. And I think that the European Center for a long time has dismissed this periphery and the signals that were sent from there, because allegedly the periphery wasn't really up to the challenge of democratic society. But actually it's not that. I think that we are really dealing with cronyism, with political corruption on a global European level. So whether we have a movement, anti-corruption movement in Romania, for me it was very telling yesterday that Romania was mentioned but not Berlusconi. And Berlusconi is in heart of it. So my vision of this is that the right wing now is using very cleverly civil society tools that we have used in Eastern Europe for 15, 20 years from the left wing to democratize society. Now the right wing is using the same tools to dismantle the house. And that's why we are confused with identity politics. That's why we are confused, because people are reacting to corruption, but they are reacting from a different articulation point. And that is, left in that respect does have a point. I claim that there is left there on the field, but the political consensus is to strangle those initiatives that spring up in Italy, that spring up in Greece, that spring up in Spain, that spring up in Croatia. There is a consensus of the political elite that that's irrelevant, because that touches the core business of politics, and that's corruption and cronyism. So I'm sorry. That was a comment.
So it a little bit hurts my feelings that you don't even mention Hungary in terms of corruption. We have really done our best. Sorry.
Well, maybe hurt feelings is an important part of this. So, I'm going to talk from a Swedish position, being a left-leaning feminist and also an academic on the other hand. Thank you for a very interesting panel, I have to say. And I was very happy when you, Cornelia, talked about let's say, the 20th century politics as also identity politics in a sense. But one thing I'm wondering is how we need also not only a new left imagination, but real social innovations in a sense. And from a Swedish perspective, you could say that not much has happened since we took in universal public childcare and the parental insurance, things that really changed, the society, and it was very much about identity politics. But in a sense, I think we've had the situation that whatever is under this umbrella of gender has had to challenge the old social systems, being more inclusive and so on, but we haven't had a new social innovation that could actually include us all in the we, people with immigrant backgrounds or not conforming to the old and so on. So I wonder if we could find something like this. And I'm not asking for Sweden, I'm asking for a much wider context. And I'm just going to conclude that I was just the other week listening to two Polish people discussing Paweł Maciewicz, who was, the ousted head of the Museum of Second World War in Gdańsk. And he talked to a colleague of mine, Kasia Jesierska, who's also a Pole. And she was saying, we need something new, an innovation. And I felt, yes, yes, yes. And then he said, well, maybe we don't just need the new. What about the welfare state, and that was on a discussion on illiberal democracy. So, well, thank you anyway.
I used to be a big fan.
Hi, I'm Rachel Dolly. I'm from Index on Censorship. I don't.
Sorry, just the technicality. So there's going to be one more comment, and then we're going to wrap up because we're running out of time. It's not your fault, it's mine.
Okay, thank you for not making it my fault. I am sitting on a jury at the moment in England, and I think that's a really interesting place to sit because it's a system where people are picked randomly from every part of society. So you sit in a room with people from every background and every type of age group and so on. And the one thing that I noticed that there's a lot of things that people are speaking from different perspectives, but the thing that brings people together is talking about how precarious their life is. So whether they're academics who are finding their pension is taken away, or women on benefits, everybody feels this sense of precariousness. And I think obviously populism has tapped into that. But it's, I would echo a little bit what Anne said. I mean, I think the sense of solidarity can also speak to that, and where you have a position which speaks to people across different backgrounds, but promises a future which is more stable, where people have something that brings them together. I think that that in many countries that politics has been lost, and somehow that has to be refound again.
Very much. Thank you. So let's go back towards the background.
Hi, Ilke Raut from the Reef Magazine for Critical Urban Research here from Austria. As the panel, like the question was, is there any positive light at the end of the tunnel? Whatever, I would really like to put in one positive example. I don't know if anybody here is aware of the new municipalist movements that are taking on in Europe and far over the borders of Europe, actually globally, where people are trying to really radically reinvent democracy on the city level, together with citizens' initiatives, far away from political party politics, the institution. They're trying to open up the institutions of the political and really reversing the way how politics are done. You know, it's like Negri Hart in their last book, they described it as changing strategy and tactics on a political field. You know, strategy as being the will of people of tackling the real needs, everyday needs, and also the big needs that has to be tackled by politics. You know, climate change, inequality, all these issues that are not at all tackled on the political representation level for many, many years now. You know, I mean, there's a completely no-go pat situation, you know? And I don't know, I really wonder why this is so much out of attention, because it's a really hopeful movement for democracy. And I mean, in Spain, which is the sort of the light tower of this movement, I mean, they went for elections, 2015, communal elections, 4-month preparation time, no money, no media support, you know, just doing platforms of initiatives, citizens' initiatives, anti-eviction movement, whatever, all sorts of refugee movements, and so on and so on. They formed their political agenda, going to the periphery, talking to people. What do you think are the actions we have to take if we make it into power? You know, first, second, third. And what came out is a political program that says solidarity, feminizing of politics, tackling the climate change issue, and really rebuilding our cities and our democracy in a radical way. So that's what they're doing now. And on the first run, they made it to have the majority in Barcelona, in Madrid, in Zaragoza, and a few other Spanish cities. So I really wonder, you know, what are we talking about? I think we really have to rebuild democracy from the very grounds. You know, there are lots of people. I mean, somebody on the panel said it like, people are so much further than the political elites and the economic elites and cultural elites, you know. They just lost touch completely. And because it's always the saying about left populism, I think that's such a stupid idea, you know, just taking the ways the right is dealing with people as completely stupid, you know, sort of crowds, you know, who can't think for themselves, and even thinking about how can we apply that for the left is so really arrogant and ignorant against the needs of people that I think we could really, I mean, forget about that and start to rebuild democracy from the grounds. Then we will have a chance to really conquer the right. I'm sure about that.
Thank you. So one more comment, and then we're going to run a closing round.
Good morning, my name is Mieke Renders. I'm the Managing Director of Trans-Europe Halls. We are a befriended network of Eurozine, and we gather independent cultural organizations in Europe. I had actually the first question. Is it correct that I see that there is a movement going on starting from civil society? I see that people are gathering themselves differently in all our member centers and outside of them. And do I also see it correctly that the civil society lists are, I mean, in Belgium we had the elections the other week, and there was a lot of grey spots, and it was lists of civil societies. I've never seen this in Belgium. Is that correct, that I see a new movement sprouting out in the soils of Europe? Question mark.
Is it?
Probably you know the book that and the author that claims that these are the mayors of the cities that actually governs the world. So we are aligned this notion, and it's not new. I will maybe focus shortly on the Polish ground. Last local election, this local election, we saw a phenomenon that we call sociopolitical alternatives. These are grassroots, civil society-based, locally based electoral committees who actually go third, not first two, but third in the local elections. So even if the places of a shallow democratization or shallow Europeanization, like the outskirts of Europe, if somebody says so, we have this phenomena there. So from this local point of view, yeah, I can confirm.
Mario?
I'm not particularly fond of the idea of civil society from this point of view. The Italian experience, for example, is interesting. The first wave of populist politics that we had in Italy around 1994, when the old political equilibrium fell down, collapsed very, very, very quickly, was very much on, I mean, the catchword was civil society against politics, and that was Berlusconi exploited very much in order to build up its consensus basis. So, I mean, civil society rhetoric can be used in different ways and can be put to the service of a very populistic message.
Thank you. Cornelia?
Yes, I agree. In Germany, we have a kind of Macron phenomenon. Sarah Wagenknecht tries to establish a movement against right-wing from the scratch, from a basement, but from above. That's Aufstehen. She calls it Aufstehen, to sit up. And this is interesting because it's a kind of try to be opposite to the right wing, but to be similar as well, because she has a very restrictive policy against migrants, and she tries to commit to a boundary protecting migration policy, which is very similar to the AfD, to the right wings. So it's not really on the opposite, but it pretends to gather from the basic, from the grassroots. And maybe it works, I doubt, but maybe it is a kind of second Macron movement.
So it's an urge for precaution. Thank you. Marc-Olivier?
Yes, another precaution. Mario didn't mention the five-star movements, but speaking about civil society rhetoric, we have to look closely at what happens with 5 stars, because I think Barcelona is very interesting, but Roma is not really doing good at the moment. But just one word about social innovation. I really agree with what we need is new social innovations, but I would say green social innovations. The problem of the Greens is that they don't find any institutional innovation that, so to say, like social democrats with the welfare state had at the same time policies, and they don't have something approaching the welfare state, but it's the only case where you have a new way of life, lifestyle that is getting with the comprehension of what's going on about ecology and so on. So I would just add this. I think it's an orientation that we need green social innovation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this has been the first panel on populism and the representation gap. Thank you for your attention, and thank you Mario Ricciardi, Dominika Kasprovic, Cornelia Kopec, and Marc-Olivier Padis for being here. I was Reka King of Pop from Eurozine. And now I want to apologize to Simon Garnett for abusing the time of his upcoming panel on media pluralism in, under pressure. So see you after a short break. Thank you so much.